So in this video, we're going to have a look at how to create a really nice arpeggiated sounding Moroder style bass. Moroder being Giorgio Moroder, who is responsible for, amongst other things, Donna Summer's I Feel Love, which is one of the biggest disco songs of all time, huge influence on electronic music. And basically what he was doing in that song was using a series of delay treatments on an arpeggiated sounding riff, a very basic riff, really, which we're going to emulate sort of in this patch. I'll let you have a quick listen, and then we're going to get into making it. So let's have a look at how to get this going. So we're going to build our Moroder bass within F-Expansion's DCAM Synth Squad. Now I just loaded up Fuser, and you can think of Fuser as being a global host for the synths that are in Synth Squad. Fuser right now doesn't have anything going on. It basically exists as a giant patch bay where everything can be patched to everything else, which allows for some really cool modulation effects and different interactions between components. So in these slots, as you can see, there's no synth loaded. And so if I play in, we don't get any actual output. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up an instance of strobe in slot 1. And strobe is a subtractive style synth. It's kind of modeled after the SH-101 and the Sequential Circuits Pro 1. So I'll just click on edit so we can see strobe, and I'll play a couple notes. So it's a nice fat synth. It sounds great with the filter off, actually. Adds some nice buzziness. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the filter into a 2-pole low pass, and I'm going to roll its cutoff down because we're going to be using a fair amount of envelope on the filter cutoff. Now, there's a couple different ways to access the envelopes within strobe. And what I'm going to choose to do is I'm going to use it from one of the mod slots here. Strobe has it hardwired here. This little envelope graph means that you can apply the mod envelope here to the filter cutoff. But the other way that you can go about doing it is to put the mod envelope into one of these slots up top, which is called a transmod slot. And when you put it into a transmod slot, then anything that you mouse over, you can apply that modulation to. And I'm going to apply this mod envelope here to a couple things. I'm going to apply it to filter cutoff. I'm going to apply it to white noise. And I'm going to apply it to the amp stage of strobe. And if you remember from our drive stages tutorial, there's a big difference between an overdriven signal going into a filter and an overdriven signal coming out of a filter. When you overdrive going in, which is accessed in strobe via this knob here, drive, in the filter section, you overdrive the input of the filter, and it kind of reduces the presence of resonance in the actual overall sound that you're trying to go for, or that you get. And so I'm going to overdrive the output stage because I want a little bit of resonance to be showing up in the actual sound that strobe is outputting. So let's have a quick listen now. Might be a little bit too much resonance. I'm just going to pull that back, and a little bit too much white noise. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fatten this tone up a little bit with the addition of a couple signals from the sub-oscillator section. I'm going to add a fair amount of the sine wave because the sine wave is going to give it body in the low end. And I'm going to add a little bit of the square wave. And the square wave is just going to add some extra harmonic content that's just going to fatten the sound up a bit. So that's sounding like a great starting point here. So I'm just going to switch over here to Animator, and this is the step sequencer that we're actually going to be working in to give us some motion and some cool differences in pitch and some different modulations within our sound that we're working on here. So right now, Animator is set to send its output to Synth 1. I'm going to switch it over to Advanced mode here because this gives us access to both the pitch function and the modulation function. And you can see here under Graphs, we have pitch and velocity, and we have shift, duration, repeat, and we have mod value and mod glide. Now, these are all just different sources of information that Animator can output that the synths can respond to. And to start with, I'm going to take all of the mod values and put them down to 0 because we're going to start applying that in some really cool ways in a minute, but it's good to have it 0 to start with. That way we can see and hear what we're working with. When I switch it back to the pitch mode, you can see that the pitches are all set to be the same. So depending on what the incoming note is from live, Animator will play this constant stream of pitches, and Strobe will respond to that. So just to let you hear what I'm talking about, we'll have a quick look at this little MIDI pattern, this clip that I've created within Live. And I'll press play here, and you'll be able to hear that Strobe will continually change its note based on the note that's coming from Live, but it will continue to play a constant stream of notes because Animator is what's actually telling Strobe what to play. Okay, so there's one thing that's happening here that I just want to overcome quickly. I'm going to switch onto auto hold, and I'm going to switch onto trigger. And this is going to get rid of that little loss of a note when we're triggering a MIDI input. So let's listen again. Okay, so that's a little bit smoother. So now we can get into some of the fun stuff here. What I'm going to do to start with is I'm going to add a little bit of swing, because this is just going to add a little bit more of a human feel to what we're working with. You can hear that right away, which is great. I'm also going to take Strobe and I'm going to drop it down an octave, and this is obviously going to affect the pitch of everything up to and including the sub-oscillators, so we're going to get a much deeper sound here. Okay. Next up, I'm going to add a tiny bit of glide. And that just adds a little bit more of a natural feel here. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to take my mod slot up here, and I'm going to select Step Sequencer 1 output. So what this means is that now the modulation section here, mod value, is going to output its values to this slot within Strobe. And whatever I take this slot and apply it to is going to be affected by the modulation values within Animator. So that might sound kind of convoluted. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to apply it to a couple things that are going to be very audible. That way you can hear exactly what I'm talking about. So I've got it applied to noise and to filter cutoff here. And I'm just going to flip back to Animator, and we're going to start this playing again. And you're not going to hear a difference right away because all of these values are zeroed. But when I start applying a little bit of modulation within here, you'll start noticing a big difference. So that's very audible. It's probably a little bit too much, so I'm going to pull back on the white noise. But what I am going to do is I'm going to take the step sequencer output here, the modulation output, I'm going to apply it to decay on my mod envelope. I'm going to reduce the amount that's going to filter cutoff, and then I'm going to increase the amount of the mod envelope that's going to filter cutoff. Because if you remember, we now have a modulation on modulation scenario. Step sequencer 1's output is going to decay on this modulation envelope. This modulation envelope is going to filter cutoff to white noise and to the amp stage. So let's have a listen again. And that's starting to sound nice and fat. So I think it's probably time that we have a listen to this bass line within the context of what we're working on here. I'm just going to pull down the volumes on all of these tracks. That way we can bring them back up accordingly. I'll let you hear the main percussion loop here. It's a hard house style beat. And I'll let you hear this kind of tribal percussion thing that I have going on here. So I'll let you hear these two in conjunction. let's bring that bass in. Okay, I quite like how that's sounding right away. But we want to do some other cool stuff here, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in another instance of strobe, and I'm going to keep it pitched up 1 octave from our initial instance of strobe. And I'm going to go back to animator here, and I'm going to take the second engine and send it to synth 2, so that's our second instance of strobe here. And I'm going to switch it over to advanced so that we have access to both the mod values and the pitch values. So now we're going to have another situation where we have both synths responding to the MIDI input from live. And I'm just going to switch the triggering settings over. So we need to switch it over to auto hold and trigger. And now we can be sure that this second instance of strobe is going to play as well and track the keyboard the way we want it to. I'll just solo this instance of strobe so we can hear it. So that's back to an initialization patch, which is totally fine for us to start with here. Because what I'm going to do is apply some mod envelope to the oscillator sync. I'm going to roll the filter cutoff down, bring up a bit of resonance, apply a little bit of mod envelope to its output as well. And then I'm going to select under my macro settings here, step sequencer 2, and this is going to be our modulation for this instance of strobe. So I'm going to apply it to stack, and the stack knob allows for the creation of additional outputs from the oscillator that are good for detuning and good for creating fat unison style effects. And I'm going to actually map it to the detune knob as well. So now when we go back to this instance of animator, these mod values here are going to affect our second instance of strobe. So let's have a listen. So that's a cool starting point. As you can see, the step sequencer is controlling the stack, so the number of output oscillators, the detuning amount, so it's creating some fatness, and we'll also have it affect the decay time on the mod envelope again. The mod envelope is also going to the sync setting. So if you remember from our oscillator sync example, this is creating a scenario where this oscillator is forced to reset according to the sub-oscillator's phase. And I'm also going to make sure that I've got it going to the filter, and I'm going to switch it over to a 2-pole low pass again. So let's have a listen again. Okay, so that's a cool scenario. And where it's actually going to get quite interesting here is I'm going to bring the number of steps down. Normally you work with a 4-step or an 8-step or a 16-step sequencer, but we're going to work with 6 here. And we're going to lose a few of the modulation outputs, but that's totally fine because what we're going to be doing is adding some intricate stuff with the pitch setting here. And I'm just going to bounce the 3rd step down 2 semitones and the 6th step up an octave. So now when we listen to this instance of strobe, it's going to be playing a melody based on the root note, but it's going to also be outputting these pitch values. So instead of playing the root note constantly over and over, on the 3rd step, it's going to jump down 2 semitones, and on the 6th step, it's going to go up 12 and then repeat. So it's going to create a complex pattern because obviously we're working in 4/4, and this is going to repeat over and over. So we're creating a little bit of an extra rhythmic aspect to this. I think I'm also going to pitch this up an octave because we've got a fair amount going on in the mid and low register already, and when we unmute this instance of strobe and listen to it, we're going to have a lot going on in the same range. So let's have a listen again. That's great. So now we're going to go and listen to both of them together. Excellent. So if you remember when I talked about our modular approach where everything can be mapped to everything else, I talked about how certain types of modulation can also be sent not just to synthesizers, but to effects. And we're going to do that here, and we're going to do it in a couple really cool ways. We're going to use an insert effect on this second instance of strobe, and it's going to be an insert effect called the tin can verb, which is right here. And we're going to use a couple different outputs to affect this signal. So I'm going to take the decay time and the size and roll it down a lot. I'm going to bring pinch and squeeze up, and this is just going to affect the style of reverb that we're getting. Let's have a listen again. And I'll solo that so we can hear it. And I'll also just play with these times manually so you can hear. So it creates some really cool phasing effects. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the output of step sequencer 2, and I'm going to apply it to the size. So now every time step sequencer 2 outputs these modulation values, it's going to be changing all of those things that we've selected within this instance of strobe, but it's also going to be changing the size of this tin can verb. And just for the sake of further demonstration, I'm going to apply a delay as well. And I'm going to have step 1's modulation values affect the wet dry on the delay. I'm going to bring the feedback up a little bit, and I'm going to turn it to a dotted quarter note, and let's have a listen again. So that sounds great. Let's go back and we're going to overdrive this a little bit more just to get a little bit more of an aggressive output on this synth. And I'm going to put a little bit more envelope on it and bring the cutoff down a little bit. And we're also going to take the envelope and add a little bit of white noise. That way we get a little bit more of that sibilant pluck at the front end. Quite like how that's sounding. And now we're going to listen to both of them in context again. All right, so I'm going to bring this second instance of strobe down in the mix a little bit. And I'm going to go and add an effect to the output of the first instance of strobe, and I'm going to add drive. So drive is a typical distortion style effect. And again, going back to our whole anything can be mapped to anything else scenario, we are going to take the output of synthesizer 1's modulation envelope, which is controlling a whole bunch of things within synth 1, but we're also going to use it to control the drive amount. And that's going to apply a little bit of distortion according to the values set in this modulation envelope. So let's listen again. Okay, that's a great starting point. So what we're going to do now is start to process the output of Fuser using a few different things. We're going to use some sidechain compression, and we're also going to use a few spatial effects set up within an audio effects rack, and that's really going to fill out our sound. So I'm going to start with an instance of Ableton's compressor here, and I'm just going to play with a few settings and just get some mild compression just to tame the signal and average it out a little bit. So I'm just going to start it playing and tweak some things here. Okay, that's going to be good for now. Next thing I'm going to do is add another compressor, and I'm going to use this as a sidechain compressor. So I'm going to take the input from the harder house beat here, and I'm just going to start these two playing in conjunction, and we're just going to duck this bass out of the way a little bit. So I'm going to minimize both of those, and that's going to take care of our dynamic control of the bass here. So next up, what I'm going to try and do is get a little bit of fluid motion. Now, Giorgio Moroder was most famous for using delays on his bass lines, and so that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to use one of Ableton's simple delays, and I'm actually going to put this into an audio effect rack. I'm going to create a second chain here, and this is going to be dry, and this is going to be delay. And I'm just going to rename this as delay chain. So for my delay signal here, I'm going to put it 100% over to wet because we've got our 100% dry signal. And this is going to allow us to affect the output of this simple delay with a few different filters and panning effects just to get some extra motion without overcoming and destroying our dry signal. So I'm going to put them both on quarter notes to start, both the left and right channel. And let's have a listen to both the dry and delayed channel together. I'm just going to bring the delay down a little bit in the mix. Okay, so I'm going to add some feedback here, and then I'm going to add an auto filter after the delay. And I'm going to use this to shave out the lows. So I'm going to put it into high pass mode and bring down the cutoff a little bit. Add a little bit of resonance, and let's see how that sounds. Okay, I'm liking how that sounds quite a bit. So I want to get some fluid left-right stereo motion here, so I'm going to add an auto pan after that. So we're taking the output of Fuser, running it through the compressors, so it's got a nice kind of sidechain feel. It's going through the delay, then the auto filter, then the auto pan, which is going to create some left-right stereo motion. And the next thing I'm going to do is actually add another auto pan before the auto filter, and I'm going to use it to do the traditional sidechain style ducking. I'm going to put it on quarter note here. There we go. And I'm going to pull the phase all the way in. So now it's just going to be causing this delay chain here to pulse up and down before it hits the auto filter and before it gets panned left-right at the end here. Bring the feedback up a little bit more. And I'm also going to add an instance of dub station to this auto pan's output. And I'm not going to use a lot of dub station's signal here, but I'm just going to be using it to get a little bit of that filtered dub delay sound. So let's listen to this together. I'm going to pull the regen down here. So now as the left-right input is being adjusted by this auto pan, it's going to be fed into dub station, which is then going to repeat those left and right channels and create a even more complex delay tail. So let's have a listen to all of this together with the beat now. You can hear a nice burbling kind of acidic feel to the output of this entire chain now. And it's going to sound even cooler if I add a little bit of LFO to the auto filters cutoff and bring the resonance up a little. Excellent. So that is our Moroder bass. It's a very typical disco-y, early acid house, very 80s sounding, but also futuristic bass tone that's quite involved, actually. It uses a good number of different modulations within Fuser to control a ton of different aspects of both of these synths. And the majority of what's happening to both of these synths is coming from Animator, which is a 1970s style, a modular style step sequencer that outputs both pitch, as we see here, and modulation values. And those modulation values that are coming off of this step sequencer are being mapped to a ton of different things within the individual synths in question. So in this case, step sequencer 1 is controlling 3 things within this first instance of strobe, and step sequencer 2 is controlling these things within the second instance of strobe. And of course, we also have them controlling various different aspects of our effects settings. And the whole thing is being put through a couple different dynamic treatments, as well as a nice delay chain to fill up the entire mix.